Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Chioma. In this video, I am continuing on in the series that I started, I think 2 videos ago, where I started sharing more about being a social worker here in Australia. So I started the series to actually address a lot of comments, so a lot of feedback that came through when I filmed my first video about being a social worker. And people just wanted to know what it takes to train to become a social worker here in Australia, or how to migrate to Australia as an overseas trained social worker. There were also questions about the available fields of practice or careers of social work that you can have here in Australia, which is actually what this video is about. So yes, in this video, I'm going to be talking about the fields of practice, or you might want to call them areas of specialization, or again, careers in social work practice here in Australia. So keep watching, don't go anywhere. Alright, so if there is anything I know about social work, it is how very diverse it is as a profession. And what I mean by this is in terms of the areas where you can practice. In this video, I want to talk about some of those fields of practice. So first of all, I'm just going to give you a run through of the common ones here in Australia, and pardon me if I skip a few. So if you're watching me from Australia and you're a social worker in Australia and you know that there's even more than I mentioned in this video, please pardon me. Again, that speaks to just how diverse the profession is. So I'm going to give you a run through of some of those areas of practice, and then I will pick and choose which ones to talk more in depth about. So let's begin. Broadly speaking, social work can be practiced at 2 different levels. There's the micro level social work and macro level social work. Micro level social work, very simply put, is social work at direct practice level. So this is where practice involves working with individuals, with families, and with groups. And there's so many different practice settings at that level. Now, if you go up to macro level social work, we're talking about social work that focuses on systems, changing systems, reviewing systems, developing systems, okay? So what happens at the top filters down to the bottom and supports what happens at micro level. In terms of the skill sets that you need to develop to practice, whether at micro or macro level, they are still highly specialized skills. So I don't want you to be thinking about micro or macro level social work as one being inferior or superior to the other, because that's not what it is, okay? Most social workers would start off at the micro level and then move up to macro level if they are interested. Some people might decide that they just want to be in direct practice throughout the lifetime of their career as social workers, and that's fine. There are also some people who, straight after training, they want to go straight to macro level practice. They are not so much interested in direct practice, and that's okay too. The majority of social workers, though, I would say, usually start off at the micro level, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video, the fields of practice within micro level social work. Some of the common fields of practice here in Australia would be homelessness, mental health, domestic and family violence, as well as sexual assaults, child protection and child welfare, aged care and disability, drugs and alcohol, hospital social work, school social work, international social work. Like I said, it's a diverse profession, and I am sure that I have skipped a few already, but these are some of the common ones here in Australia. So let me talk about some really popular fields of practice. Number 1 would be in the family services. And when I say family services, I just want you to think of it in terms of a broad categorization of services that are focused on domestic and family violence, or child protection and child welfare, as well as sexual assault. So all of these would sort of come under family services, okay? In this practice setting, as a social worker, you will be working primarily with people at risk of violence or abuse, and this could be adults or it could be children. Obviously, when children are involved, if there's a risk of harm or risk of significant harm to children, you would be acting as a mandatory reporter as a social worker. Okay, so yes, mandatory reporting here in Australia just means that you need to escalate any matters concerning child welfare, especially where a child has been assessed to be at risk of harm or risk of significant harm. Okay, so you would need to escalate your reporting all the way to the very top, and there is a government agency at the top that receives that escalation for child protection matters. Okay, I'm not going to go into details about how child protection works, but one thing I'm going to say here is we as social workers do not exist in the child protection space just to pull children away from their homes. That's not primarily what child protection is about. Child protection at its very primary level is focused on continuing to support the protective elements in the life of a child to keep that child safe, or to continue to keep that child safe. It's not about pulling the child away from home. Taking a child away from home is like the last resort. So domestic and family violence social workers would usually work in services where they provide one-on-one support to victims, and that one-on-one support can involve things like practical assistance where you're doing safety planning, and that safety planning might include you having to arrange emergency accommodation for them and other items that they might need for their day-to-day living as well, and then making arrangements for, to support any ongoing court issues as well as a result of the DV. So you might be supporting them as well to connect to the police for the purpose of obtaining an AVO. So an AVO is an apprehended violence order, and it is a notice that is issued to the perpetrator in that domestic violence situation. So these are some of the things you might be doing. And depending on the organization that you work at, you might actually be providing these sorts of supports in a case management system, which means that you might be holding the client on for a while, or you might be in a service where it's a crisis intervention service, and maybe your contact with victims of domestic violence might just be a one-off thing. So there's different types of organizations that you can work in, even within the domestic violence space. For instance, I work in a university, which broadly speaking, I am not in the family services space. I am in the school social worker space, if you get what I mean. But a primary focus of my work is supporting students who have experienced domestic or family violence or sexual assault as well. So again, that's just to give you a bit of an idea how there's a huge overlap in terms of how services deliver support to clients, and in terms of the practice settings as well. Okay, so now let's move to hospital social work. And listen, I just need to make this disclaimer here. I am not an expert in this regard, because I've never worked in a hospital, even though there was a time that I kind of considered it, but I didn't pursue it any further. But to be a hospital social worker here in Australia, I know that there is one thing you need to do, which is to get your vaccines. Yeah, so there's like a batch of vaccines you need to take before you're allowed to work in a hospital. I don't remember what those vaccines are, but I just remembered this and I thought to let you know as well. Now, as a hospital social worker, you can work in different departments within the hospital. So hospitals have different kind of wards with different specialized areas of treatment. So as a social worker, you can work in any of these units. And I guess your day-to-day would look a little different depending on the area of specialization within the hospital that you find yourself. So you might be in the trauma unit and work with people who have really severe disabling injuries. You might be working in the pediatrics unit and working with children. You might be in oncology, working with cancer patients. So I guess basically the focus of your work as a hospital social worker would be around improving well-being outcomes for your patients throughout the lifetime of their care within the hospital and even post-discharge. So yes, you would need to be facilitating those connections to continue to support the clients both when they are in hospital and outside of the hospital. So you would need to stay on top of treatment plans, some referral coordination as well, especially at the point where the client is being discharged back into the community You might also have to facilitate rehabilitation and integration back into their community. You might be supporting the family of these clients to continue to care for the patients. So that might involve some home visits and things like that. Again, depending on the particular organization where you work and the sorts of policies that they have in place around patient care and all of that. So yeah, like I said, I'm not an expert in hospital social work, but I hope this has given you a bit of an idea what sorts of things social workers in that practice setting do. Another practice setting I want to talk about would be school social work. So here I want you to be thinking primary school, high school, university, okay? So all those different levels of education. Your responsibilities and your role as a social worker would depend on exactly what level of education you're working in. So in primary school, the focus might be a bit different to someone like me, for instance, working in a university. But in primary school, I imagine that there might be a focus on things like behavioral support, if there are issues like bullying and harassment and all those sorts of things that you think would be present in that kind of environment and with that particular client group. It might involve case management, home visits, and with home visits, you might be doing a bit of family support as well, because even though your primary client would be a child who attends that school, thinking about the systems that surround the child, the family is usually like the closest, and so you might have to support the family to be able to support the child. So there's that crossover and that overlap as well. Moving up to high school, there might still be some of these carrying through from primary school to high school as well, around behavioral support, staff training. So yes, you might be delivering training programs to other staff in the school as well. You might also have some programs running around suicide prevention and other prevention programs. You might have programs developed around consent education and things like that. So yes, these are some of the things that you can expect to do as a school social worker. And there might be other things as well. I mean, this is by no means an exhaustive list. So as you may already know, social workers are trained in human behavior, which would mean that depending on the exact practice setting that you find yourself, you might also be required to provide therapeutic interventions. So this is where we talk about the kind of therapies that social workers use. And again, there's an overlap between social work and counseling and psychology of the kind of interventions that we apply. And this is something that I think is really important if you're thinking about training to become a social worker in any of these practice settings, okay? It would be really nice if you can do some training on some of these therapies that are common in social work practice. So pick up some counseling skills, and you also want to pick up some knowledge about the therapies, the common therapies. So there is CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. There is DBT. There's narrative therapy as well. There's a bunch of different therapies. So in terms of the models of practice, social workers would usually be working from a strengths-based position in most practice settings, okay? Being strengths-based is always welcome, but as well, you might find yourself in an organization where it's more task-focused, you know? So yeah, it's very diverse. Like I said, I was just going to pick and choose. I wasn't going to give you a run through of everything that social workers do in each of the fields of practice that I have mentioned, because this video would then be too long. But I hope this has given you a good idea what sorts of fields of practice are available here in Australia and how you can fit into this if you're coming from another country, okay? So this is where I would ask you, is there a particular field of practice that you're interested in? And if you are an overseas trained social worker, what area of social work are you practicing in at the moment, and what do you like or not like about it? And are you considering moving into another area of practice? Because I feel that there's a high mobility among social workers, always hopping from one area of practice to the other. And I think it's a good thing actually to gain, very robust experience. Yeah, leave your comments in the comment section. And this is the point where You have to make sure you don't miss any of the other videos coming your way in this series. So make sure that you've subscribed and turned on your notification bell, very important, so that you don't miss anything when it drops. In the meantime, check out the links in the description box to my previous videos as well. I'm sure you would find them helpful and useful. I will come your way again really soon, okay? So let me go back behind the scenes and continue recording. I'll see you again soon. Goodbye and stay safe.